Hello everybody, today I am filming another one of my most requested cars. This is a 2005 Mercedes-Benz SLK55 AMG. The SLK55 is a very interesting car for a variety of reasons. A few years ago, it's the sort of car that I would have simply dismissed out of hand, saying, well, it's not going to be as good as a Boxster, is it? Or as exciting as a BMW Z4M. The reality is, though, that as I have grown, my interest in cars and my tastes have changed somewhat. Now, I've no doubt that as an all-round package, the Boxster is still king of the hill, but there are things about the SLK that I think make it worth your consideration, especially if the sharp handling and the badge on the Boxster aren't things that really matter to you. Of course, the big selling point of the SLK is that engine. It's a version of the venerable M113 Mercedes V8, the same engine, more or less, as used in my own S500, in the C55, CLK55, E55, S55, etc., etc. It exists here in naturally aspirated 5.4 litre form, producing just over 350 horsepower and perhaps more importantly, just shy of 370 pound-foot of torque. Now, the M113 usually has one very big problem, and that's the gearbox that's attached to it. In nearly all other applications, it gets mated with the Mercedes 5-speed transmission, which is what I've got in my S500. You get in the C55, the E55, the SL55, etc., etc. Now that is, technically speaking, a very good gearbox. It's compact, it's strong, it lasts forever, and it's just a very smooth thing. However, it does not like being told what to do. And in a sports car, well, that really rather ruins things. The SLK is notable because this is the first application of Mercedes 7G-tronic 7-speed automatic gearbox. Now, this isn't quite the same as the gearbox that you get in the C63. It uses some of the same parts, but the C63 has what Mercedes call the MCT, the multi-clutch technology, or whatever it is. That's actually a bit of a misnomer because it isn't a dual clutch transmission like you might think. It's instead a torque converter automatic with a wet clutch pack that basically locks it to the engine. This is a more traditional torque converter setup, but it should still be a fair bit better than the old 5-speed. You can change gears by the use of little buttons on the back of the wheel here, which is very much the same setup as you get in the C55. You've got 3 modes: Comfort, which I'm currently in, Sporty, and Manual. As soon as we get on some more interesting roads, we're going to put the car into manual and see how she fares and if that gearbox really does make a big improvement, which I hope it will. Now, perhaps the most obvious car to compare with would be the SL55, which I do have some experience of. The reasons being that, of course, they're both big, comfy Mercs, although this one is quite a bit smaller, and they have more or less the same engine. The SL gets the supercharged version, however, it's also quite a bit heavier, and I really mean that. This car is some half a ton lighter than the SL. Now, sitting down into this, I think there would be a lot of people who could automatically make the decision as to whether they want an SLK or an SL. The SL55 is an unbelievably luxurious car. Everything is covered in leather. Even the 15-year-old examples out there still feel absolutely wonderful and magnificent. Whereas the SLK, even in 55 guys, feels like a more sort of budget car. There's horrible scratchy plastic, and this material is just weird all over the place, and it just doesn't feel anywhere near as premium as you would like. However, there will be a lot of people for whom that's not really a problem, and even bimbling along here at 40-50 mile an hour, there are a lot of things about the SLK that I really do like. The suspension, which is specific for the AMG, seems very well tuned for British back roads. It's extremely comfortable, and I've been spending the last few days driving around in a Kia Sportage, and I think this is actually a bit better. You've got the air scarf, which is definitely doing something. I've got my jacket on, which I think is partly defeating the point of it. And with the roof down, there's not too much buffeting. I'm getting a little bit of wind in my hair, which has recently been cut, and it's actually pretty pleasant and not too noisy in here. This car is pretty much bone standard. There are no modifications that we know about in this vehicle, so I think it's a very good example to start off with. It's in a colour called Iridium Silver, which its owner Julian deliberately sought out. It's not the colour for me, although I know that I own a silver Mercedes, but I'm just not a fan of silver cars in general. But the shape of this thing is absolutely amazing. They look so good and they look so modern despite the fact they are about 15 years old. However, how do they drive? Well, let's change into manual mode. The car was already in 6th gear and it does certainly change smoothly enough. On the open road, the SLK really started to shine. While it's not as pin-sharp as the Porsche or BMW opposition, the SLK had far more feel through the steering than its bigger brother, and with far less weight to carry, that engine proved extremely effective. Like many Mercs of their period, the SLK is criminally undertired. That torque has to get to the ground through 245 section tyres at the rear, with no limited slip differential in sight. However, if you're sensible with your throttle inputs, the car's linear power delivery makes it actually very easy to pilot at good speed, and the car's small size makes it ideal for my favourite kind of road. Quite surprising was the driving position. It's nearly Aston Martin-like, with you sat really low down in the car. The brakes are effective, early SLK55s having bespoke 6-pot calipers, which later were replaced in many examples with the 4-pot items from the C55. The gearbox is certainly an improvement over the 5-speed, and the buttons on the wheel were surprisingly tactile. However, it is by modern standards still very slow, and not as quick as I recall the MCT box from the 63s. In reality, the car is best left in sport mode for this kind of driving. When you're in manual, it shifts too jerkily and slowly to really enhance the driving experience, which is a great shame. It's worth pointing out that if an automatic is what you're after, the box is probably just as good, if not better than the Tiptronic used in the Porsche of the period, which is actually the old 5-speed Mercedes box. Of course, both BMW and Porsche offer manual options too, which Mercedes never thought of. In terms of value, the Mercedes is an interesting proposition. Examples of the 55 can be had from under £10,000, and my research tells me that the AMG can actually be more reliable than the lesser engined examples. With many Mercs of the period, rust is now the major enemy. For a 986 or 987 Boxster owner, it generally seems to be engine troubles which keep owners awake at night. However, for SLK fans, it's the roof. They're generally reliable, and fixes can often be as simple as cleaning a sensor, but if it breaks properly, be prepared to grease your wallet. In terms of running costs, that big V8 can of course be fairly thirsty, but the car I was driving had averaged about 26 to the gallon over the last 100 miles, which was a mixture of motorway and more spirited driving, and I thought that's pretty good for a car of that weight and performance, and it's not really a million miles away from what you'd get from a 911 of the period. There are of course also plenty of specialists to help you maintain it, so running costs needn't be ruinous. Choosing between this and an SL would be difficult. They can both be had for similar money, but to drive the SLK is definitely the superior car. The complex ABC suspension system on the SL means that it rides well, but robs the car of steering feel. And while it may be massively up on power and torque, the huge curb weight and dim-witted 5-speed box mean that in the real world, I doubt there'd be much between them. The real question is, do you really like to drive? If you do, then the SLK is the better choice, but as a cruiser, the SL is miles ahead. Fortunately, both provide a thumping V8 soundtrack. Honestly, the SLK impressed me far more than I thought it possibly could, the major downside being the interior, which is just too low rent for a Mercedes in my opinion. However, this car is a genuine Boxster alternative. The Porsche is still the leader in the segment, having the sharper handling, a great manual box, a zingy engine, and ridiculous practicality thanks to its 2 boots. However, the SLK is probably the safer bet mechanically, and that V8 is every bit a match for the Porsche 6-pods. The huge torque means that making swift progress in the Mercedes is in fact even easier than in a Boxster, but it's no less enjoyable. The two cars actually have such a different character that they really shouldn't be considered rivals, and that's why I call this car an alternative. In fact, you could really own both and not feel that much like you doubled up. And for that reason, the SLK gets a thumbs up from me. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one.